It all started, as these things often do, with a piece of paper. Not a declaration of war, not a court summons, but something far more insidious in the meticulously manicured world of the Meadow Creek Homeowners Association: a violation notice. It was tucked under the windshield wiper of my perfectly reliable, if slightly unimpressive, 10-year-old sedan. The paper, a crisp and offensive shade of pastel yellow, felt heavier than it should, weighted down by the invisible ink of petty tyranny. I lived in Meadow Creek, a community that prided itself on uniformity and curb appeal. The houses were all painted in one of 5 approved shades of beige. The lawns were mowed to a regulation height of exactly 2.5 inches, and the mailboxes stood at attention like a row of tin soldiers. I was a quiet resident. I paid my dues on time. I brought my trash cans in before sunset on collection day, and I never, ever left my garden hose coiled in a manner that could be described as disorderly. I was, for all intents and purposes, the perfect cog in the HOA's beige machine. The violation notice cited improper vehicle parking. I stared at it, then at my car. It was parked in my own designated spot, directly in front of my own garage. The tires were not on the grass. The bumper was a good 2 feet from the sidewalk. It wasn't blocking any access. It was, by any rational measure, parked perfectly. The notice, however, informed me that my rear left tire was, and I quote, misaligned with the designated parking space marker by an estimated 3 inches, creating an unseemly visual disruption. I laughed. It had to be a joke, a prank from a neighbor, perhaps. But the bottom of the notice bore the signature of one Carol Bradshaw, HOA president, a signature as sharp and severe as the woman herself. Carol was a woman who seemed to be powered by the perceived failings of others. She patrolled the neighborhood in her golf cart, a visor pulled low over her eyes, her lips permanently pursed into a thin line of disapproval. She was the self-appointed guardian of Meadow Creek's aesthetic soul, and she wielded the HOA's Book of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, the CC and Rs, like a holy text. I crumpled the notice and tossed it. A 3-inch misalignment. It was absurd. I had work to do, a life to live. I didn't have time for this level of pedantic nonsense. That was my first mistake, underestimating the boundless reserves of time and energy a person like Carol has for pedantic nonsense. A week later, a second notice appeared. This time, it was for prolonged stationary placement. Apparently, my car, still in its designated spot, hadn't moved in 4 days. I worked from home. I had no reason to move it. According to Carol, this suggested the vehicle might be inoperable, a clear violation of the rule against storing disabled vehicles on the property. The notice came with a fine, $25. Now, I was annoyed. I took a picture of my car, clearly in its spot. I took a short video of myself starting the engine, proving its operability. I attached these to a polite, carefully worded email to the HOA board, explaining the situation and respectfully requesting the fine be waived. I explained that I worked from home and my parking habits were a direct reflection of my job, not the state of my vehicle. The reply, from Carol's official HOA email address, came within minutes. It was a masterclass in condescending dismissal. Dear resident, it began, the rules are in place to maintain the community's high standards. Your compliance is not optional. The fine stands. Please ensure your vehicle is moved periodically to avoid further penalties. There was no acknowledgement of my evidence, no addressing my points, just a digital brick wall. The war had begun, and I didn't even know I was a soldier. The next week, I made a point to drive my car around the block every other day. It felt ridiculous, burning gasoline for the sole purpose of appeasing a neighborhood tyrant. But I did it, and still, the notices kept coming. One for a slight fluid drip on the asphalt, which turned out to be condensation from the air conditioner. Another for my tires being underinflated, which Carol had apparently determined by sight alone from her passing golf cart. Each notice came with a new fine, each one escalating. $50, $100. My polite emails turned into frustrated ones. My frustration turned into a cold, simmering anger. I was being targeted. It was a one-woman campaign of harassment, laundered through the official channels of the HOA. Other neighbors had cars far older than mine, cars that leaked actual oil, cars that were perpetually covered in bird droppings. But they were Carol's friends, members of her social circle. I was a quiet single guy who kept to himself. I was an easy target. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning. I had a rare in-person meeting downtown, an important one. I walked out of my front door, coffee in hand, car keys jangling, and stopped dead. The space was empty. My designated parking spot, the focal point of so much bureaucratic misery, was barren. For a moment, my mind refused to process it. Had I parked somewhere else? Did I lend it to someone? Then, the cold dread washed over me. I looked at the curb, and there it was, a faint, greasy mark where a tow truck's boom had likely rested. My blood ran cold, then hot. She wouldn't. She couldn't. Oh, but she could. And she did. A frantic call to the city's non-emergency line confirmed it. My car had been towed at the request of the Meadow Creek HOA for multiple unresolved parking violations. The rage I felt was a pure, white-hot thing. It wasn't just about the car. It was the injustice, the sheer unadulterated abuse of power. I had to take a ride share to the tow yard, an hour-long trip to an industrial wasteland on the other side of the county. The impound lot was a graveyard of bad decisions and misfortune, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. The man behind the greasy plexiglass window looked at me with bored, unsympathetic eyes. "That'll be for $150, he grunted. "Towing fee, first day's storage, administrative fee, $450. To retrieve my own legally registered, legally parked car from a prison I never sentenced. It too, I paid, my hand shaking as I inserted my credit card. The money was a painful blow, but the humiliation was worse. As I walked through the dusty lot to find my car, I saw the official impound sheet on the driver's seat. The reason for the tow: abandoned inoperable vehicle, as per HOA directive. The directive was signed, of course, by Carol Bradshaw. Driving home, the silence in my car was deafening. The anger had subsided, replaced by something colder and harder. Revenge, I thought, was a dish best served cold. But this wasn't going to be a hot-headed, slash-the-tires kind of revenge. That was Carol's level. No, this was going to be a different kind of dish. It would be cold, yes, but it would also be meticulously prepared, legally sound, and served on a platter of her own making. That night, I didn't sleep. I made a pot of the strongest coffee I could find, and I sat down at my dining room table. In front of me, I placed the thick, 3-ring binder that contained the Meadow Creek HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions. I had only ever skimmed it before. Now, I was going to read every single word, every bylaw, every amendment, every obscure clause. I was going to learn that book better than Carol ever had. For hours I read. My living room was lit only by the glow of my laptop, where I had pulled up the county's property maps and the city's municipal codes. I cross-referenced everything. I highlighted passages. I made notes in the margins. I was no longer a frustrated resident. I was a legal scholar on a mission. And then, around M, buried deep in a section titled Common Areas and Facilities, I found it. It was a single, beautiful, glorious paragraph. It described the shared properties owned and maintained by the HOA for the benefit of all residents. It listed the community pool, the tennis courts, and the HOA clubhouse. The clubhouse was a small, neat building where the board held its monthly meetings. It was surrounded by a pristine, emerald green lawn that was Carol's pride and joy. The lawn was watered, fertilized, and mowed with the religious fervor. It was, in her eyes, the sacred heart of Meadow Creek. The paragraph defined this entire parcel, the building and the lawn, as a designated common area. It then went on to state that common areas were for the use and enjoyment of all residents in good standing. I checked my bank account. My HOA dues were paid up. I was a resident in good standing. My heart began to pound. I scanned the rest of the CC and Rs, frantically searching for any restrictions on the use of the specific common area. There were rules for the pool: no running. Rules for the tennis courts: proper footwear required. But for the clubhouse lawn, nothing. Not a single word about what you could or could not do on that patch of grass. I switched to the city's municipal code. I searched for parking regulations. There were endless rules about parking on public streets, in fire lanes, in front of hydrants, but this lawn was not a public street. It was private property, co-owned by the HOA members. It was a civil matter, outside the direct jurisdiction of the police, unless a specific law was being broken. And as far as I could tell, no law would be. A slow, wolfish grin spread across my face. An idea, fully formed and deliciously malicious, bloomed in my mind. Carol had used the rulebook to take my car. I would use the same rulebook to turn my car into a monument to her defeat. The next evening, under the cloak of darkness, I put my plan into action. I had my car. It was legally registered, insured, and perfectly operable. I had the impound receipt to prove it. I waited until after PM, when the neighborhood was asleep. I started the engine, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet night. I didn't drive toward the street. I drove across my own lawn slowly, and then onto the sidewalk for a few feet before turning onto the street. My destination was just 2 blocks away. The HOA clubhouse. It sat there, smug and silent in the moonlight, its lawn looking like a green velvet carpet. There was a gentle slope from the street, not a curb, allowing for easy access for the riding mowers. Easy access for a 10-year-old sedan too. I took a deep breath, shifted into drive, and turned the wheel. The tires bumped softly as they left the asphalt and rolled onto the grass. I drove slowly, deliberately, across the sacred lawn, leaving gentle but undeniable tracks in the dew-kissed turf. I positioned the car perfectly, right in the center of the lawn, directly in front of the main entrance to the clubhouse. It was parked at a slight, jaunty angle, an unseemly visual disruption, if you will. I put the car in park. I engaged the emergency brake. I turned off the engine, locked the doors, and pocketed my keys. I took a moment to admire my work. My humble sedan, the subject of so much scorn, now sat like a modern art installation on Carol's manicured masterpiece. It was beautiful. Walked home, the night air feeling crisp and clean. I felt no guilt, no fear, only a profound sense of calm. The board meeting was tomorrow night. They would have to walk past my car to get inside. They would have to look at it. They would have to acknowledge it. They could send me notices. They could fine me. They could call me and scream. But the one thing they couldn't do, I was betting my last $450 on it, was tow it. I had the book on my side. I went inside, poured myself a glass of water, and went to bed. For the first time in weeks, I slept like a baby, dreaming of the beautiful, beige and green chaos that the morning would bring. The war wasn't over, but I had just captured the enemy's capital city without firing a single shot. And my car, my loyal, long-suffering vehicle, was my victory flag, planted firmly in the heart of their territory.